To see on this video is a combination of my 40 years of study of the published literature, as well as 30 years worth of patient contact as a colorectal surgeon. I'm not here to diagnose or treat anyone. I'm here for educational purposes only because no manner of brains is worth a good set of bells. Hey, it's Dr. Toker, your friendly neighborhood colorectal surgeon, and I am on a mission to educate the world in terms of gut health and the microbiome and how that impacts your daily life. I certainly hope you will join me on this journey, but you're going to have to buckle up, Buttercup. We're talking gut stuff. And actually today we are talking back to school stuff, to be honest with you. Hey, it's Dr. Toker, and good morning. Welcome to our weekly, what I like to call our bullpen, surgical bullpen. It's that time of the week where we kind of go over scientific hot topics. This conversation, like all of my Thursday morning conversations, is sponsored by a company called Super Patch. And this is a company, we'll talk about their technology later in the show, but critical to some of these back to school topics that we are talking about. And while I will recognize that this has nothing to do with your gut, and I know most people tune in because I'm a colorectal surgeon, I discuss dietary issues, microbiome, intestinal fortitude, etc. I happen to also have a very personal connection to children who suffer with focus issues. My son just moved off to college today, actually. So big day for him. My daughter's a senior in college. Both of these kids have attention issues. I struggle with focus. And I've been very fortunate as a doctor. I've known other doctors who can kind of help. I've known where to start. I've known how to recognize this at a very young age. And we intervened with our children at a very young age. And some of you out there may not know what to do and may not realize there is an intervention. Or maybe you've been told your kid has, some ADHD or regular ADD. They've got focus issues, but you've not been interested in a medical management that involves prescriptions. Is there anything else you can do? Or perhaps you just kind of have lost focus yourself. And so let's not just talk about the kids. Let's remind ourselves, how do we kind of get our memory back, our focus, our mojo? Mojo. I'm big on mojo. Anybody who works with me in the operating room knows, don't mess with the mojo, all right? And mojo requires focus. Now, cute little acronym for focus. You should follow one course until successful. And I do have a little bone to pick with this concept because I truly believe there's more than one way to skin a cat. Of course, as a surgeon, that's my job, is to figure out all the proper ways to skin that cat without getting into trouble. However, the problem lies when people get off of task. It's not that the task is currently impossible. It's just that the task gets dropped inadvertently. And so that, my friends, is a lack of focus. And so today we're going to talk about focus, how you lost it, why you don't have it, how you're going to get it back, how Super Patch is going to help you, along with some supplements and some lifestyle changes, some behavioral changes. I do highly suggest, if your child is demonstrating a severe lack of focus, that you get them evaluated. And I will be honest, it's expensive and insurance doesn't always cover it. I had to pay cash money, a lot of cash money for my children to be evaluated. But let me tell you how invaluable that piece of information is. We did it for my daughter when she was 4 probably, and my son when he was 3 or 4. And it's very difficult to get an insurance company to pay for that. So just know it is worth the investment. Find a PhD in child psychology who does testing, educational testing, and get them tested. If you're an adult and you've always struggled, again, um, get tested. This is it. Usually, it's a PhD psychologist that does this type of testing, and usually those psychologists do a lot of pediatrics and educational stuff. If you ever needed a prescription as an adult, that's almost always given out by a psychiatrist. But pediatricians do prescribe the medication should you need them. And I'll be honest, both of my children needed it. We tried many of these techniques, and some of them worked quite well, but not quite enough to um, make us satisfied with their progress in school. So, and my daughter's off of all these medicines, and my son's almost off all these medicines. So I certainly don't advocate for life, but until they're old enough to learn how to do this themselves, which brings up a good point. Focus comes from the frontal cortex. This is the front part of your brain. We've talked about the frontal cortex in the past because this is the part of your brain that's responsible for the command decisions. This is your maturity and your decision making skills. This part of the brain has just a bazillion connections between all the cells, multiple connections between cells. It's short circuit to get information back and forth quickly. Your brain is a supercomputer that is amazingly fast, faster than one would expect even electricity to move. It is shocking how fast your brain can move. And for it to be effective, these neurons need to have a thick layer of myelin. Myelin is the insulating sheath around the nerve. It takes many years for a nerve to get that type of myelinization. And so we think proper frontal cortex maturity usually does not occur until the 20s, late 20s, in fact, they think 26. So for all of our discussions on age of reason, 26 is probably the right answer, especially in the environment of high stress, which modern life seems to put human beings through high stress. So if your kids are not quite old enough for organizational function, they may need supplements and medications as an assistant. One of the things I love about the super patch is that it's not a medication. If you're very hesitant, as I was for many years, to give your kids medicine, this is one more thing to add. Does this help? I would not avoid the medicine just for the sake of avoiding the medicine. Education is one of those things. If you fall too far behind, it's very difficult to catch up. So I highly, and I'm not an educator, and I'm sure some of the people watching are, and they can throw their 2 cents in. But in my opinion, the public school system waits too long for this assessment. They will actually wait until the third or fourth grade before suggesting education for kids. It's just that's how at least in Texas, if you want the school system to pay for it, which they will in some instances, if you have a younger child and you don't want to wait until they're 8 because they would miss a lot of language sweet spot. Actually, if you wait until 8, then that's kind of on your dime. So the purpose of this go to back to school lecture is number one, focus on your kid. They are children and they are going to act like kids, and they should. They should run wild. I fully, but anyone who's seen my children, they know. They're right. You should let them run free. That's what kids do. But when it severely inhibits their safety, and I have seen dangerous situations because of ADHD, or if it's severely limiting their learning skills or their grades, then you should intervene. Now, for just a minute, I'm going to have an argument with teachers. I don't want anyone sedating their kids until they're zombies and the teachers are happy. That was never my goal. Talk to any teacher who taught my children, and they will know. They wanted my kids on stronger medicine, and I refused. Won't do it. I want to make sure they can read, they can write, they know their arithmetic. And if they fidget a little bit, that's just going to have to be what we tolerate. And we'll talk about how fidgeting can be managed with certain techniques And your child, if they do have ADHD, are protected by the American with Disabilities Act. You may need to remind some school authorities that that is the case, which means they need to be accommodated for certain things, not to disruption of other students, but for their own success. And so I never advocate for disruption, but I do advocate for individual success. So we're going to talk about that. I will tell you, I utilize every one of these techniques and have since I was a child, and find them extraordinarily effective, even for a regular student or business person to be successful in any endeavor that they pursue. So, frontal cortex is where this organizational pattern takes place. Okay, so how do you develop your frontal cortex other than just kind of age out? You can ramp up the speed with which the front part of your brain develops by doing some things, puzzles in particular. And I am a puzzle master. I've always loved puzzles. Gen X, man, we grew up before there were cell phones and video games. Video games came when we were kind of like in elementary school, late elementary, middle school. You could go to play video games. Pong is not exactly a puzzle. Jailbreak might have been a little bit of a puzzle, but not really. Right? So we still engaged in real puzzles, and highly suggested. I love doing the maze thing. I used to love doing the word find thing. That was my favorite. Where's Waldo? That's a little, I don't know. That's a little lowbrow. But if for young children, Wells Waldo is fantastic. Athletics, and we talked about this last week. Athletics is critical to mental development because you're constantly problem solving under a timed situation. I played almost every sport, right? Most of them, it's competitive. There's another compatriot with you that's chasing to the ball or trying to achieve the same goal you are, and you're trying to beat them. So you're trying to solve a puzzle in a limited amount of time. You're trying to be clever and also use physical prowess. And so those things do develop the frontal cortex. Artistic endeavor. My children, as I was raised, this may be a European thing. This came from my mother, not my father. And she was raised by nuns in Germany. Okay, so German nuns. If you're in Germany raised by nuns, you'll know what I'm talking about. But every student needs to have a mental gymnastics, a physical gymnastics, an artistic gymnastics, and even a musical one. So we were required to learn a language, play an instrument, draw or sculpt or paint or whatever the case may be. We had to play sports. And then in the summertime, when there was no school, my mother couldn't believe there was no school. We always engaged in labor, believe it or not, and physical labor. And we did puzzles and memorization games like Simon Says and that sort of thing. And honestly, being a doctor is nothing but memorization games. And shout out to everyone who's had to memorize crazy acronyms and that sort of thing to get through school. Now, things that inhibit the frontal cortex, we talked about this a little bit, maybe a month ago, but stress, big time. Stress prevents the myelination of nerves because of noradrenaline that tends to inhibit this process. Stress also works with the microbiome, which is what grants us our neurotransmitters. So stress is horrible for developing the frontal cortex, decision making. If you're under stress, can't make a decision, right? Processed food is another thing that destroys your ability to make a decision, mainly because it destroys with the microbiome. But hunger, there are some kids, and I actually was one of these kids, where I was responsible for my own meals starting probably in middle school. As my parents divorced, my mother was working. If I had to cook, I'm not gonna eat. Pretty sure I wasn't gonna eat. In high school, I had teachers that were concerned that they knew I didn't eat. I didn't eat breakfast and I didn't eat dinner. I ate lunch at school. And so the absence of food can damage your decision-making skills. Lack of sleep can as well. Neurotransmitter imbalance is, of course, what we focus on. Why? Because that is something that we as an external force can intervene in. We have recognized that people with ADHD seem to have an imbalance in noradrenaline or norepinephrine. And so the medications for ADHD play on that pathway of norepinephrine in our brains, and it is reasonably effective. Your microbiome contributes the precursors to norepinephrine. And so microbiome health is incredibly important to all of us who are lacking focus, especially your children. Now, this is a problem with my kids because I was a surgery resident with my daughter, and I was brand new in practice and had really been fired because I was pregnant with my son. So I had to whip together a practice real quick. And so stress, when mom is pregnant and she is under stress, the children are much more likely to be ADHD children. So I'm going to apologize to my children right now for being under stress. They know me. They know I'm always under stress. There was no such thing as a stress patch back then. And frankly, the way doctors were trained back then and the way female doctors in particular were treated 22 years ago was very different than it is now. I don't think this would happen in modern times, but anyway. And then genetics tends to run in the family just a little bit. Like I say, it's on both of our sides of the family, and my husband says, no, it's really just me and my brother. So it's just kind of depends. tends to run in families. Okay, so we talked about the microbiome, gut-brain axis. And so the gut makes serotonin and dopamine and noradrenaline. It's going to make histamine and GABA. GABA is important for sleep. And so the lack of sleep, adding stress, eating processed food, having environmental toxins in your life, all of these things alter the microbiome and therefore upset neurotransmitters and your ability to get a neurotransmitter from where it's sourced in the gut, cross the blood-brain barrier to your brain, or directly through the vagal nerve up to your brain. Either way, if you alter the source, then the target organ doesn't get what it needs. And so your brain requires neurotransmitters from the gut, thus the gut-brain axis. Now, Bruce Lee once said, the successful warrior is just an average man with laser-like focus. And so the question is, how can we in our lives, even if you don't have this pathology of inattention, how can we have laser-like focus? How can we improve that? We live in a world where the population is aging. The baby boomers are kind of getting older. And so people are aging. This aging generation is staying alive longer. So we have more older people. I guess the best way to say it. The baby boomers. And they want to keep their focus, right? I don't want to live until I'm 95 if I go nutso at 70. Right? So I want to keep my brains for as long as humanly possible. So some of you may not be worried about your kids or your grandkids, but you personally might think, hey, what can I do to not be so damn forgetful because I keep forgetting my keys, or if I don't write it down, I can't remember, or, I keep letting people down, I'm always late, things like that. If that's your struggle, then look at here, pay close attention. This is what we call study or work hygiene. Now, anybody who's been through professional school, and so for example, law school, vet school, dental school, medical school, you've gotten a PhD, some sort of like your job is nothing but focus and study. For a living, you might have a very focus heavy job. You crunch numbers for a living, that sort of thing. When you do that, and you're having to commit something to memory in particular, you cannot be distracted. For you to remember something, you've got to have full function of the frontal cortex. One of the things that's missing in ADHD kids is that they don't keep things in short-term memory long enough. They don't pay attention to it long enough to incorporate it into a long-term memory. So the inability to focus on one thing is limiting their ability to learn a language, learn how to read, that sort of thing. And these things are critical, which is why we're going to start at an early age, in my opinion. So when you have an important work to do, term paper to do, you're writing a paper, you've got a project due, or you are studying, to all my med students who may be watching, avoid distractions, right? So it was always very hard for me to study in a public space, but I knew not to study in my bedroom. So I would always find the quietest place on campus, a little cubbyhole somewhere where no one ever went. At LSU, they had these, it could be kind of scary late at night. They had these old fashioned stacks. Do the libraries still have that? So they had like these old stacks, and then parts of the library where people would group study. And they had parts of the library where there were like individual little rooms for group study. Could never do that. Don't do that if you don't have focus. And then there was like the old part, dusty part. No one ever went in there. Parts of the library, uninteresting books. No one cared. Empty desks. Not a person saying a word. And I don't know if that exists anymore. This was, of course, 40 years ago. But that was my favorite place to study. Or in my dorm room. Our dorm had it was like a group study area, a group meeting area. There wasn't everybody, no one was ever in that room. So, sometimes if I didn't want to walk across campus late at night, I would study there. So anyway, so find a place that has no distractions, but try not to make it your actual room where you sleep. Okay, because I don't want you to interfere with your room. So you don't use your bedroom for business or for studying. Do your best to mitigate stress. And we've talked in the past how to do that. And I think I have a slide coming up here in a minute. In the modern era, there's cell phones. Good grief, that is annoying. It's like you got to turn off the notifications to study, but when you turn off the notifications, your mom might think you're dead. Or the hospital or whatever. So somebody's going to try to call you, the phone will be blocked, and then they'll freak out. And then they start hammer texting. At some point, you're going to scare people. So you got to hit the sweet spot. If you can, set notifications on your phone to auto respond back to people. Hey, listen, give me 1 hour and I'll call you back, or something like that. That way they understand that, no, you're not dead, but you're in the middle of an important project. Or you can hand your phone to someone who will take messages for you. And that's what I do in the operating room. There's a nurse that holds my phone. When you are studying in an open space, hide. That's my best advice. Just hide from people. That's what I do. I've always considered myself an introvert, even though I'm extrovertedly social. It's a very hard dynamic for me to explain, but I love being by myself in a closed room. So close the door. It keeps people from being curious and walking in. Mozart. Can I tell you how clutch Mozart is? I'll give you the story. So, and again, I grew up with a European woman who did not listen to the radio. She listened to Beethoven was her favorite, but of course Mozart, classical music. And we had one of those record players, that you could stack all the records on. It looked like a piece of furniture. Like imagine a giant box. I'm trying to tell Gen Z and the millennials what this looks like because they have no idea. You're talking big box. Imagine an Amazon package, giant, bigger than an Amazon, gigantic, big box made out of wood. The speakers are built in. You can open the top and click it open like you would the hood of a car. And within there is a turntable. It has a long stick and like a little peg thing to it. And you can stack This is the original Pandora. You could stack, gosh, I would think 4 or 5, if not more, albums on that, and they would just drop one at a time. You put one down, you put the little arm on it. When it reached the end, lifted up and went out to finish, it would auto lift over. The second album would fall and it would drop again. When the album fell, the needle would fall. And it was like this automated thing, and the speakers were built in. I grew up with that constantly. That was what was playing. Tchaikovsky and Mozart and Beethoven and the original Peter Wolf visit, it was a musical. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you need to look it up with at YouTube, and your children must grow up to that. And that is critical childhood learning. Anyway, I digress. When you listen to complex music, classical music, your brain has to open so many different pathways to interpret this music that it allows you to implant memories in parts of your brain that aren't otherwise accessible. If you listen to just like simple music, the Beatles or Nirvana, either one, very simple beats, 3-man band kind of things, the music is too simple. Modern music, forget about it. Okay, the music is too simple. Your brain gets distracted by it as opposed to opening it up like a little sponge. If you want to learn something, softly play Mozart in the background. There is a scientific study that talks about Mozart in particular with grades. And I will tell you, as someone who was a straight A student in medical school, I made 1B in surgery because women aren't supposed to be surgeons. The irony. I thank Mozart for that, because it helps you remember things in different parts of the brain. I still remember, shockingly, a lot of stuff from medical school, and I think it's because of that. Keep your study space clean, no clutter. Work, clean, no clutter. You're home, do your best. You're talking to a perpetual slob, okay? So do your best to keep your surfaces as clean as humanly possible. I will not pan my camera around so you can see what this table looks like. You'd be horrified. My mother would smack me. You want to keep a running task list, and I have kept a task list for about 48 years now. It used to be a sheet of paper that I would write my list in little squares next to each thing. I would check off each one or put a line through it. In medical school, the list got super duper long and the line went through it. In the modern era, I use my notebook feature on my phone, and I just erase it if I've done it. If it's in progress, but I started it, I always put a little in progress. So keeping a task list keeps you on task so you don't get distracted. Making daily routines is critical. That way you do things like I am a robot. And then you can't forget. It's like, when you drive home and you're like, how the hell did I even get home? You ever have y'all, is that just me? Have y'all ever done that? You're like, I don't even remember getting here. Or you show up at the house and saying, what the hell am I doing here? I'm going to the grocery store. Because you just get like in the zone, right? And that may be ADD. No, but right. So a daily routine for your health and your safety. Now, I did not know this was called the Pomodoro Technique, but I looked it up to see if anyone else had ever done this. And sure enough, that's what it's called. I thought I was being creative when I did this. My brain just naturally needed frequent breaks, I'll be honest. So when I would study in medical school, on the weekends, you would study probably like 10 hours in a row. I know it's shocking. Sit in one spot and study for 10 hours. And what I found is if I studied for about 25 minutes and then let my brain wander for about 5 minutes, I had the energy to sit back down for another 25 minutes. And I would do that. And every now and then I would take then maybe a 30-minute break and watch something that I had recorded. We had VHS back in the day. Watch on the VHS, like Friends for the week or something to this effect. Or I would go work out. I would play tennis, come back, repeat. So my days and my weekends are really kind of a blur, but a lot of it is work, break, work, break. Give your brain a break. There's no way you're going to be able to, in my opinion, sit and study straight and actually absorb it. At some point, your brain forgets it. So even if you're not an ADD person, even if you feel like you've got a great memory, do yourself a favor. Work in small bits with little breaks in between. You'd be shocked at how much more you can remember, how much more efficient your studying can be. So I have this saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Of course, you cannot find an icon of someone eating an actual elephant. That would be horrible. Elephants are smart and they are fantastic. And I love elephants. Please do not put a comment in the comment section. But here's a cute little elephant eating some pizza. So it's one bite at a time, right? So one little thing at a time. And again, I was looking this up just to see if I'm the only one. And the answer is no. This is a technique also when it comes to achieving goals. And we talked about this as far as athletic victory, but the same applies for academic victory as well, which is what focus is all about, in my opinion. Specific goal. What is your specific goal? What do you need to accomplish? Each of these goals needs to be measurable in some fashion. You have to be able to track it. One of the reasons I tell patients to do a food diary when we're talking about gut health is because if you don't write it down, how do you know? How do you know what's bothering you? How do you know if you're getting better or not? I hate it when people say, I'm still having problems. And then when you start asking them, you realize, no, they are 90% better, right? So I don't need to change my plan if we've achieved 90% success. We just need more time or maybe a tweak, right? So keep a diary, make everything measurable, track your progress, and don't make the goals unachievable. Right? So your goal cannot be by next week, I want to lose 30 pounds. Like that is not going to happen. You'd have to have something amputated for a 30-pound weight loss, right? So don't be over ambitious. Okay. Be realistic. You want an achievable goal. Okay. Realistic. You got a deadline. Be realistic. You can lose your 30 pounds, but your deadline can't be next week. You know what I'm saying? So we're going to have to be realistic here. Relevant. I want you to take a giant goal, break it into a bunch of little bitty specific goals, and makes each one of the things that you are doing applicable towards that greater goal. We just registered my son for school. He's trying to figure out what's he going to take. And son, the most important thing is that every class you take needs to apply toward your major. So, I mean, I know you're interested in this. One day you'll have an elective. Maybe you can take it. Don't know. But for this semester, you got to take these classes and they all apply toward your major, right? So they have to be relevant, fit into the big picture. And then again, timely. If your deadline is like 6 years from now, well, I mean, it depends on the goal. Like pay off your mortgage in 6 years. That is a very good goal. What is my goal for this week? So you need to have like a goal. It's like every week you need to sort of keep chiseling, keep chiseling at it. Because if you just say in 6 years, I want to do that, but you never set little individual little goals, 6 years from now, you're going to be staring at this giant, goal that you've not worked towards. So every one of these little things has to be timely. Okay. So teach yourself, teach your kids, study techniques, and then goal achieving. This is very critical in people who just run down rabbit holes. It makes you a fascinating person. But if you don't stay on track, if you don't stay on task, you will learn a whole lot of stuff and have zero goals to show for it. And this is critical. Now, fidget hygiene. Okay. And this is what teachers don't like. Fidgeting. I've been a fidgeter. My children are fidgeters. I always have something in my hand when I'm speaking. You may or may not have noticed that when we're talking, it can be anything, but I'm always playing with something in my hand and I cannot help myself. Your children might just be the same way. And this is a little device I got for my kids because it doesn't make any loud noises, which means your kid can be kind of toggling on these little buttons with their hands. It's a small little cube. I wish I had one in my presence. But small little cube, and then kind of toggle with the little buttons without making noises that are distracting other children. Now, it can be distracting if this kid is all over creation. I totally get that. I do. And in my son in particular, when he was young, you could literally watch him crawl right out of his own skin. Like the only thing that kept his muscles on his bones was probably his skin. I don't know. He was a mover. God bless his soul. He's kind of outgrown the moving. He still twitches a little bit like I do, but not like he used to. Anyway, so you don't want him that movie. That may be, I mean, and that was ultimately, we did wind up giving him medicine to help with that and to make sure he stayed on target with his academics. But exercising and standing are critical. So if you got a kid that's a wiggle worm, as I used to call my son, got ants in your pants, that kind of thing, stand up, stand in the back of the room. If the teacher will allow, like between class, leave the classroom, run around the building and come back into the classroom. If it's a high school kid or some such, get some physical exercise. A friend of mine was telling me that her teacher brilliantly came up with a chair with silent wheels on it. So he could kind of wiggle around a little and gyrate just a little bit. Doesn't make any noise. There's no squeaking noises. He does fine. The other kids aren't bothered by it. Boom, problem solved. So God bless those teachers who are figuring out little things like that. Encourage art. Artistic endeavor really does help somebody with focus issues. And it's funny because kids with ADD can play video games forever, but they will not sit down and do their Spanish homework. Am I wrong? I mean, come on now. Can we make a video game out of Spanish vocabulary? And the answer is yes. They have a video game for math. And my kids had to play the Dallas Catholic schools district has online math video games. So it solves that problem. So the kid's pretty decent at math, all things considered. Okay, supplements. Now, I'm not advocating for supplements for children, to be fair. I think feeding them properly is important. Little children are not just little adults. They have special metabolisms. So really, these supplements kind of apply to adults. For children, I would more importantly keep them on a clean diet away from artificial stuff. If you're an adult and want to engage in some of these, here's the list. Theanine, super popular. Medicinal mushrooms, lion's mane in particular, is pretty popular. You can find supplements that will contain these things. Getting sunlight, critical. Get outside. Vitamin D is super important because it helps with stress. Omega-3 fatty acids, and I am going to at some point do, I think, 4 or 5 little short Instagram reels that describe the omega-3, omega-6 fatty acid imbalance problem. That's a real thing that is leading to illness in the human population. So focus on omega-3 fatty acids. Ashwagandha is more of a nighttime thing. Rhodiola and ginseng. These are adaptogens for stress, and those are best in the morning. Choline is just, it helps you make acetylcholine, which is a neurotransmitter. Inulin, polyphenols. These are things that help the microbiome. The microbiome makes your neurotransmitters. And then caffeine. And I will fully admit that I gave my children caffeine in those final days before resorting to medicine, because caffeine is a stimulant that can help them focus. For my daughter, that was pretty much all she needed. She went on the medicine, off the medicine, on the medicine, off the medicine, but I think caffeine does the same for her. Whereas my son, not good enough. He hates caffeine. He does not like it. People who have ADD, if they take caffeine, it actually calms them down. They don't like the feeling of their medications. In fact, if you give a kid ADD medicine, Adderall, Ritalin, and it makes them hyper, they do not have ADHD, right? So if you have ADHD and you take Adderall or Ritalin, it zombifies them. They hate it. Compliance is a big problem with medications in kids with ADD. All right, the microbiome, we talked about that. Clean diet, good. The lion's mane is the most common thing for memory. There's another one called maitake. mushroom. These things are really good for neurologic function. The chaga and the reishi mushrooms are pretty good for neurotransmitter release from the microbiome. So they're more gut health. Reishi helps with sleep, just to give you an idea on the mushrooms. Okay, mitigating stress. We've talked about this in the past. Preparing for tomorrow, today. Let's lay our clothes out tonight. So we're not doing that tomorrow. Our lunches are made tonight, so we don't have to do that tomorrow. So the breakfast, everything's set up so that tomorrow all I have to do is wake up. I know where everything is. I already know what I'm doing. Everybody's on their little routine. And tonight before I go to bed, we will repeat. What's for breakfast? What's for lunch? What's for dinner? Where's my clothes? Right? I did that for me and the kids and my husband, and that's how we live. Okay. So prepare for tomorrow today. And so you're not running around like a lunatic tomorrow morning. Make your routines, exercise, stretching, sunlight. Now we're going to start talking about the patches because, in my opinion, the peace patch, if I had this as a youngster, I feel of all the things that I made so hard on myself, I could have made easier on myself. I think my kids would have had an easier time. My daughter uses a peace patch and a focus patch on the daily. And those two things have helped her inordinately. So I'm a firm believer. Ashwagandha at night, make a little tea, a little ashwagandha, something or other. I found this great. It's a fizzy bubble. It's like some kind of tonic water. It's got ashwagandha and magnesium in it. Oh, that's so nice. No sugar, a little bit of a rose hint to it. So it's lovely, and it's perfect right before you go to bed if you want a little fizzy bubble. Okay. So focus patch by Super Patch. It sort of helped to support frontal cortex. It's just simply designed to help you organize your thoughts. If you do not have ADD, if you do not have focus problems, you may not recognize if this is helping you or not. So, like all the super patches, you kind of have to have a pathway that's working too fast or working too slow to recognize an improvement. So, the people who struggle with focus know this thing works. And people who don't know if it helps with focus or not, I'm cramming for a test tonight, I'm going to use it. I don't know. I don't know if that's going to help you like that. I wouldn't even advocate for that, to be honest with you. I would advocate for these patches for people who struggle with certain symptoms. It's not for any disease process. It's not to diagnose or cure any disease. It's here to sort of support your brain's response to input. And when the input is off, the output is off. And so people with ADD, this seems to be the issue. The input is everywhere, so the output is nowhere. So you want to organize your frontal cortex, and focus can help. Now, granted, my children are teenagers, and I do not know if a younger person would benefit from this or not, but there's no medicine in it, so there's no contraindication to using it. If your child is very young and prone to putting stuff in their mouths, don't use it, right? Because it's a piece of it is a Band-Aid. I do have friends who have autistic children who will wear this between the shoulder blades or on their back so they can't reach it. And I'm not advocating that. I'm just telling you, I know people who have done that. But if you've got teenagers, I have seen this work to good function in myself and my own teenage children. They do get good sleep. They are on a clean diet, and they do engage in all of those study techniques that I just described, or at least I hope they remember to do it. My daughter does. My son just left for college. We'll find out. How much did you learn from mom, son? You're about to find out. Okay, so that way, when you combine diet, exercise, a lifestyle change, an organizational pattern, and this support, that combination is very effective. And in my own family's life, my daughter has been able to get off of her ADD medicines, and my son is mostly off of them, except when there's an important test to take, like when he took the ACT and the SAT, we kind of insisted. But he can make his 3-month supply of medicine last about 6 months by using these things, which is a victory as far as I'm concerned. We were told he was so um, affected by this lack of focus that he would never be able to go to a regular school. They wanted us to enroll him at 4 years old in a special school, and I refused. And to this day, I refuse. I'm kind of like Forrest Gump's mom, not quite that motivated, because I think she, engaged with, liaison with, y'all remember that scene? I would never do that. But I am motivated that my child, who is a genius, by the way, his IQ is somewhere around 160. So he's got a lot on his mind just because of his brain bone. And there was no possible way I wasn't going to give him the best opportunity. So we deployed everything from diet, nutrition, exercise, the art, the music. I did give him some supplements like ashwagandha at night. I would make him tea, and he uses this patch, and then he is also taking the medication. So that's kind of full frontal on him. And he's an awesome kid. Stunningly handsome, if I might say so myself. Anyway, okay, so Super Patch, like the record player I was talking about, basically, each one of these patches is playing a different song, and that patch is like the record, and your brain is just that box with the speakers that turns the needle scratches into a work of art. And so that is essentially what a super patch is doing for you. It is organizing your brain in a way to get it to factory reset, to get it back just to not superhuman. You will never become superhuman with this. It's not the point. The point is to get a pathway in your brain that's working too fast or too slow, and therefore you're not being optimal, and getting it back into the right speed of pathway, the right processing speed, so that you can be the most optimal person that you can be. Okay. I personally suggest for people who are struggling with focus issues, the focus patch, the peace patch. People who don't focus well have a tendency to be a little anxious personality type, tend to be a little on the stressed side. So the focus and the peace are critical. If you struggle with sleep, sleep is critical. And for overall health, I do suggest Liberty Patch. On days that I work out, I use the Victory Patch instead, which is also very similar. Okay, so that's back to school and focus. If you've ever struggled in focus, then you'll know what I'm talking about. Feel free to search our website, Dr. Anna Toker, for that kind of information. The company is Super Patch, and I do thank them. And check out them on our website or just at superpatch.com. And then if you are listening on Spotify, we will have the slides available on our website. As per usual, that is a free download. And I'm hoping to wrangle a friend of mine for sort of a surgeon lounge after hours kind of conversation, where she and I are going to talk about back to school issues and helping kids study and focus, because she and I both have kids that are roughly the same age. And I hope you join me for that. That will be coming up soon. And I will see you guys next week. Next week, we are going to talk about anxiety, actually. Next week is anxiety. My son's moving off to school. He's exhibiting some lifestyle change anxiety, not in a pathologic way. That's a normal response. Let's talk about how to handle that and what we do about that from a diet and behavioral lifestyle in our back to school series. And we will see you next